If you're not making some people mad, then you're not branding hard enough. And any brand we've worked with, not almost any brand, there's somebody at some level has some type of pushback on it. You want to be taking some risks, and you want to stand out for your customers. So you need to know who your customers are, and you're not trying to make everybody happy.
Welcome to the Ecomm Breakthrough Podcast. Are you ready to unlock the full potential and growth in your business? You've already crossed 7 figures in sales, but the challenge is knowing how to take your business to the next level.
How would you like to scale your brand from 6 figures to over 8 figures in sales on Shopify in just 12 months? Well, Joe has done it, and today we're going to be breaking down exactly how. Welcome to the Ecomm Breakthrough Podcast. I'm your host, Josh Hadley. I scaled my own brand from 0 to 8 figures in sales, and now my mission is to take it to over 9 figures in sales. On my journey to 9 figures, I bring you the unfiltered conversations with the smartest minds in e-commerce. Past guests include Ezra Firestone, Kevin King, and Michael E. Gerber, author of The E-Myth. Today, I'm excited to introduce you all to Joe Putnam. Joe is the founder of Conversion Engine. It is an e-commerce performance marketing agency that has helped Shopify stores scale from 6 to 8 figures in as little as 12 months. With a background in direct response copywriting and growth strategy, Joe specializes in crafting meta ads, Google campaigns, and retention strategies that actually convert. He's helped brands like Bogey Bros, No Rivals, Salt Mafia, and Back Down South Clothing Co. unlock rapid growth, including scaling one store from $650K to over $10 million in a single year. Joe is passionate about demystifying marketing for entrepreneurs, sharing those frameworks and real case studies that help brands build sustainable growth instead of just chasing quick wins. When Joe's not helping brands scale, you'll find him training for triathlons, exploring the outdoors, or investing in the next wave of business growth opportunities. With that introduction, welcome to the show, Joe.
Hey, it's great to be here.
Joe, super excited to have you on. Super impressive, background of being able to scale stores up on Shopify. And I'm sure you're seeing, e-commerce continue to evolve in today's day and age. So, Joe, as we dive into today's episode, you're speaking to 7-figure e-commerce sellers. What are some of the things that are on the forefront of your mind that are working that we're going to be diving into that you think people need to be listening to?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we're very focused on right now, I'm very focused on right now, is basically ad creative for meta ad campaigns and the things you can do to make your ad creative and your ads more successful, and kind of use that as a leverage point in 2026. So I'm sure you're aware, and most of the listeners are aware that meta has changed a lot over the last kind of 2 to 3 years. But one thing that hasn't changed is, one of the levers you can pull that has the biggest impact on results for either, your return on ad spend or scaling your brand is the quality and the effectiveness of your creative. So yeah, I have a lot of points there that we can talk about today for brand owners.
Love that. Meta continues to evolve. And that's, I think, the key part is being able to keep up with all of these changes. And so, Joe, one of those things is obviously like creative diversity. We had the Andromeda update as well. So why don't you dive straight into that? Because I think that's the latest kind of like wave of things that have changed on Meta, which is how most people are driving traffic to their Shopify storefront. So what's the new Andromeda update? Kind of peel back the curtain and help our listeners understand what's going on.
Sure. Yeah. So related to that update, and that's one of the biggest things, most recent things that people have been talking about. Although, it's been a little while now, so it's not like it happened last month. It's a change that was made and people have been adjusting to. But essentially, one of the main things with it is Meta made a change where there's a need to have more creative diversity. And the whole point of it is having different types of ads and a diversity of creative where Meta's goal is to find new pockets of buyers with that creative. And so kind of one of the things that they were, kind of saying or adjusting for is a lot of times in an ad account, you'll have maybe even a large number of creative. But even if you have, 40, 50, even 100 ads in an ad account, it's still possible that those ads are not very diverse. They might, a lot of them are the same angles. They're designed a similar way. And so, one of the things that's important in 2026 is to provide more creative diversity for your meta ads, but also knowing how to do that in the right way so that you're able to benefit from it and not just kind of putting more ads in the ad account and then not, kind of benefiting the way you could.
Yeah. So how are you recommending, I guess, what are you guys doing as an agency and what are you advising clients to be doing or changing with this based on this update?
Yeah. So the main thing is looking at, depending on the ad account, looking at it and kind of researching and paying attention to, and actually there's a very big kind of long in-depth research process we use upfront for brands to identify different potential angles for that brand. And one of the things that I've been emphasizing with owners is it's not just, like I said, let's get ads up that look different, but how do we get even different ad angles into the ad account that are going to hit, different buyer personas. Or even another way to look at it is sometimes, people need to see different angles for the same product. And eventually after they see 2, 3, 4, 5 different angles, one of those angles lands and hits, or they all kind of add up together to hit right. And then someone makes a purchase at that point. So again, it's more about diversity and starting from the ad angle versus just, the way the ad looks, the design, the style of the ad, things like that. An example I like to use is there's a business called Stitch Fix. Have you heard of them before?
Yeah.
Okay. So Stitch Fix, they're publicly traded. They have this service where they'll send you sign up and they'll send you, five clothing items a month and to kind of, update your wardrobe and different things like that. And I like them as an example for creative diversity because if you go to their Facebook ad library, you look at their ad account, they primarily are using kind of an angle of sign up and get clothes, and kind of, sign up for a box, get clothes delivered, all that kind of stuff. But there's really a big opportunity there to provide more diversity and hit that from more ad angles. And, our experience is by doing that, they're going to see better results from identifying those angles, creating ads from 5, 6, 7 different angles, and not just kind of hitting it, straight on the same angle every single time. So an example would be with Stitch Fix, or first of all, when you sign up, they ask you questions about kind of your clothes and your sizing and different things like that. So, your height, your weight, but they'll ask you questions like, are your sleeves typically too short or too long? Are your short shirts typically too short, too long, whatever, and get a feel for, what your inseam is and your sizing is. And then I don't know exactly how they do it, but my understanding is they use AI to then build kind of a profile for you where, your clothes or the brands they choose are designed to fit you specifically. So anyway, there's a component where the size is better, but they also have a feature where you can shop. It's called Freestyle. And anyway, you can kind of shop on their store and you don't have to just wait for a box of clothes to come and different things like that. And anyway, in case it's not obvious yet, my wife and I, we've used the service and it's something that I've used, but I personally prefer the Freestyle shopping over getting a new box every month. New box is kind of annoying. It's kind of stressful. I've got to send stuff back. I don't get to pick it out. But anyway, the fact that the clothes fit well is a big benefit to me and to my wife and things like that. So how do we use that for creative angles? What I would say is they should be they should be running ads such as, hey, I've never felt more confident. Shopping has never been easier. I can get a box if I want, but I can also, shop on the site. And it's so easy to shop on the site and find things that I want. And that's really that's very rough. I haven't spent some time to actually break this down. But again, you start with those first two, confidence, ease of shopping, things like that. Anyway, those are just different angles you can use that are going to hit different customers differently. And it's better than just, like I said, over and over again, hey, sign up for a box of clothes, sign up for a box of clothes, sign up for a box of clothes. So that would be an example of how to do creative diversity right and why it's important for ad accounts.
Yeah. And I think that just becomes more and more important as, with AI and the adoption of that, people should be putting out more content, but it's not just about more content, more ads that are the same, just with like a different image. It's about hitting it at different angles. So I love that. Now, Joe, as we dove into, your bio, you talked about some of your experiences of really being able to like blow up some brands and see some rapid growth. I'd be very interested to dive into some of those case studies of brands that came to you. What are some of the things that you primarily worked on day one, and why did they grow so fast? Specifically, the 6-figure brand that went to 8 figures in 12 months, like how and why did that happen?
Sure. Yeah. And that's actually a very fascinating case study. So that brand came to us and they were getting about a 5 ROAS and they were pretty happy with where they were. And they kind of felt like, hey, 5 ROAS means we should spike the football and we should be excited where we are and all that kind of stuff. But anyway, started having a conversation with the founder and did an audit of their ad account. And the main thing that stood out that I kind of talked to the owner about, or we talked to the owner about, was, hey, you're leaving a lot of money on the table. So first of all, again, people think, a 5 ROAS is really exciting and a reason to celebrate. And, let's post some screenshots and let's brag about it and all that kind of stuff. But actually for this brand, it meant, hey, the demand curve for your products is extremely high. people want what you're selling, but if you don't scale into it, you're going to be leaving a lot of money on the table. And so we kind of broke that down for them and kind of dove into their margins and their numbers and figured out kind of, what their contribution margin was and different things like that. And at what points they're still profitable and how they should stick scale and all that kind of stuff. And they were working with a freelancer who, again, also was very happy with the results and was saying, hey, we're spending 15,000 a month. We're getting a 5 ROAS. Like, this is pretty exciting. This is great. Let's celebrate. Let's go to the beach. Let's have some fun. But anyway, again, so we broke it all down and kind of explained how they're leaving money on the table, started scaling their spend, came up with a strategy they could use to scale that spend. And then, eventually we scaled them from, like I said, 6 to 8 figures in 12 months, which again is an indication of that demand curve was very high based on that initial ROAS. But eventually, and one thing I would say is the brand owner was uncomfortable about 2 months in and was saying things like, hey, ROAS is coming down. I'm a little bit nervous. Like, hey, we're only getting a 3 ROAS now. We were getting a 5 before. Like, they were, he just had a little bit of, kind of confusion and disappointment. And we had to break it down for him and explain kind of how that works. But eventually we got to the point where, I forget what it was, but ROAS was, let's say even 2.25, 2.4, somewhere around that level. But we scaled ad spend up to over 100,000 a month. Had some $200,000, $300,000 months, especially during, Black Friday and Christmas and things like that. And eventually he realized, and he saw the picture and he realized, hey, $1 million a month in revenue at scale is better than, at a 2.25 ROAS, is better than, a 5 ROAS and only spending $15,000 a month. The profit there's a really big difference. And so eventually he realized it, he saw the picture, and kind of was pretty excited about it. So it was a lot of fun. And then that's kind of just the number side. So really it started with understanding their numbers and building out a strategy around that, and not kind of being too happy too soon. And then another side of it was pushing the owner out of his comfort zone. And then obviously there's the creative side and the ad side and the strategy side we had to put in as well. And I'm happy to talk about that more, but I don't know, that's kind of bigger picture and kind of where all that started from.
Were they profitable on front end acquisition, or did they have to kind of become profitable 30 days after or anything like that?
Yeah, so they were profitable up front. So even first purchase, eventually they were still profitable first purchase. So they had very healthy profit margins, high conversion rates. And so, yeah, they were profitable purchase one. And then, but the other thing was, and we did actually launch email and SMS for them. And then once you combined that, the retention side, the customers coming back side to it, especially even then you realize like, hey, every customer we're getting into the door today becomes someone who can buy for Black Friday, who's going to buy a gift for Christmas, who's going to come back when we do a new drop. And so, short answer is they were profitable first purchase, but even more profitable when you layered in retention and return customers and all that kind of stuff.
Awesome. How does it work with, especially on Meta, right? Especially if you're just trying to sell into the US and you have a very niche market that you're going after, there's a lot of brand owners that can have a great ROAS, but you can't just say, hey, I'm going to start doubling my ad spend on Meta tomorrow and then anticipate that ROAS staying the same. In fact, as you continue to scale, more often than not, that ROAS gets lesser and lesser. And it's just like, it creates massive inefficiencies. So my question to you is like, how did you keep them profitable on the front end while also pushing that the front end ad spend? Because do you not eventually just hit kind of like a TAM or a total addressable market that you've already tapped out of?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And I mean, that was one of the biggest questions that this brand owner had, where he kind of had this fear where he thought, hey, we're getting it good now. We're spending 15, 20,000 a month on ads. We're getting a 5 ROAS, but he's like, at some point we're going to hit a ceiling, and at some point, we're going to tap out. And that's true. I mean, everybody will kind of hit that, but I would say in the US, for most brands, the market is bigger than a lot of people realize. And there's always the opportunity of going international. So, that is always an opportunity that's on the table. But I would say it really starts with, first of all, really knowing your numbers. And we have some calculators that we use with brand owners to identify, their break-even ROAS, their contribution margin, kind of how all of that breaks down at the ROAS level. So we know if we hit a certain ROAS, then, we're going to break even. And if we hit this ROAS, then we have this contribution margin, which means we have this amount of money per box that goes out that's going towards profit and fixed costs. And so I would say, with your marketing team, it's important for them to know those numbers. So when you should be scaling up and when you should be pulling back. But I would also say it's really important for brand owners to really understand those numbers as well, because we've had a lot of experience working with brand owners. They don't know that number. And so they kind of are making a decision based on their gut. And they're like, oh, somebody else is talking about they have a 3.5, so we should be getting a 3.5 or whatever that might be. But every business is different. Profit margins are different for every brand. And then the last thing is you have to think about it from a strategy perspective, which is, your particular business, what is your strategy? And so is your strategy high growth, low margin because we want to go volume and we want to build this as big as we can so that we do have a customer base to sell to for the second purchase, third purchase, things like that? Or do we need to be more conservative and make sure that we're putting more money in our pocket at this point? And so, there's different things to kind of think through and look through. But I would say that's a very important step, is knowing your numbers. And that way you're making decisions based on real numbers and not kind of your gut, which is not, the way you want to be making those types of decisions.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. I think that makes a massive difference, like setting your strategy from the get-go. And there's also a good number of Shopify brands where you're actually not profitable on the front end. You're going to make that all back up on the back end, which then comes into the retention marketing. And so there's 1,000,001 different ways to scale on Shopify, but it is very important for you as the brand owner to understand what is the actual value lever that you are going to be driving to where it actually drives your profitability. Otherwise, you just run yourself out of business. So knowing your numbers, obviously very important, but you also talked about the creative that you guys introduced. So what type of creative? Because I'm sure that was a component to them being able to double, triple, quadruple ad spend rather than just like putting more ad spend behind the same ad that produced them 5 ROAS.
Yeah. So great point. Great question. And I would say creative strategy is a really important part of this process. So just, your overall meta strategy and then your creative strategy. So it's not just, hey, let's put in any ads that we can and see what happens. Actually, one thing that kind of drives me a little bit crazy is when people think volume is the answer. But anyway, at Conversion Engine, we don't view volume being the solution. It's how do we put as many ads in the ad account that we believe have a high confidence level that they'll succeed based on the strategy and the inputs and the research, and then we run those. So it's not just, throw spaghetti at the wall and test everything that you can, but you want to do research, come up with strategy, and then, kind of put ad accounts in the ad account for a reason. So with this particular brand, one thing I would mention is they had a product that lent itself to being very viral. And not every brand has that opportunity, but this particular brand did. We're working with another brand right now that also has the same thing. And so we use something that I call the lightning rod strategy for their brand, which is essentially we led with their most controversial products. And so purposefully, we designed ads and put ads in the ad account that led with their most controversial products. And the result of that is their ads would have 2,500 likes. Their ads would have 1,000 shares, 1,000 comments. And just from a strategy perspective, and again, this doesn't fit for every single brand, but the engagement side and the comment side and things like that does work, where Facebook likes it when your ads have that type of engagement. So they actually lower your costs and kind of give you, better position and things like that in the marketplace if your ads are getting that type of engagement. Plus, anytime someone comments and tags or they share your ad with somebody, that's basically free advertising for you because you're paying to get in front of the first person. But someone tags 3 of their friends, they share it with somebody, and so sometimes we'll run ads that talk about kind of purposefully kind of get people to do that. But this particular campaign, the strategy was, let's lead with the most controversial. Let's get that lightning rod out there. Let's get people reacting, responding, talking about it, thinking about it, with the realization that a large percentage of people would click through to the site because they're like, I've got to check this out. Let me go to the site and see what's there. And they would choose something that wasn't quite as controversial. So maybe, they're not willing to, put that kind of polo on. But, you lead with that and then somebody walks out the door with something else. So that's a strategy that works really well with them. But, something we came up with based on consumer psychology, study of their customers, also, A/B testing and things like that. And we realized, hey, let's make sure we're designing creative this direction. We're leading with this. And so that worked obviously very well for them. It was a big part of that. But again, I just want to kind of pull back a little bit and say, it starts with, what is our strategy? What's our approach? How do we understand consumer psychology? And not just, let's throw as many ads as we can and let's, kind of see if anything sticks against the wall. It's an informed strategy is a big part of that process.
Yeah, no, I love it. I think that very smart, and understanding like the customer psychographics, like what do they actually need? What's the transformation that they're looking for before buying that product? I think that's a deep fundamental like basis of your success whenever you're doing any type of advertising. Joe, tell me more about some of those other case studies of brands that you've worked with that you guys have been able to help scale them up so that our listeners can maybe get some ideas as to how they could scale their own brands?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. One of the things I would say, and I was just thinking about this while you made that last comment, is I think it's important for brands to be willing to take risks and for them to be willing to take a stand for their brand. So one mistake I see a lot of brands make is, they kind of want to make everybody happy. But I like to say, if you're not making some people mad, then you're not branding hard enough. And, any brand we've worked with, not almost any brand, there's somebody at some level has some type of pushback on it. You want to be taking some risks and you want to stand out for your customers. So you need to know who your customers are, and you're not trying to make everybody happy. So Bogey Bros would be an example of that, where, not everybody is going to want to wear their polos, but there are some people who really vibe with it, really get excited about it, all that kind of stuff. And so again, you're not trying to make everyone happy. You're trying to make your customers really excited about what you have and kind of building your ad strategy and even your brand strategy around that. So I would say that's one thing. Another thing we focus on and we're big on is basically emotional storytelling. I think is something else that's really important for brands, and targeting and hitting emotions. And so if your ads are too safe and if you're not taking risks, I like one thing you mentioned earlier, if your ads aren't focused on the outcome and the solution for your customers, but at an emotional level, then anyway, it's harder to really kind of connect with customers and then, ultimately have those triggers that get them to buy. So the emotional side of it, we do something that we call brand DNA research. We also do something called customer sentiment analysis, where we analyze what is the emotional experience. Well, I would even say experiences people have with this brand, and how do we unlock that, build that into the creative strategy, build that into the ad strategy, things like that. I like to tell people that we think as humans, we're very logical creatures. So we think, we make decisions based on logic. But actually, if you study consumers, if you study, people, you realize we're actually very emotionally driven. And we use logic to justify kind of our decisions and our purchases. We primarily make emotionally based. Our emotions are a really big part of our decision-making process. So we emphasize, hey, let's do the research up front. Let's understand the brand. Let's understand the customer experience. Let's identify the selling points, the core messaging pillars, and let's figure out how do we create ads that touch them at an emotional level and not just try to make sense to them or be logical or whatever that might be. So yeah, that's another part of the process. And I could kind of talk about that more. But I guess there is one specific brand where we focused on kind of the emotional storytelling side. You want me to get into that?
I would love to hear it. Yeah, let's hear that.
Okay, cool. So the brand is a brand where it was a kind of a country lifestyle brand. Hats, t-shirts, things like that, kind of for people who like to go to rodeos, they drive trucks, they wear cowboy boots, those types of customers. And the founder had this really kind of emotional story. Basically, short version is he was in a car accident. He became paralyzed. He was in a wheelchair and, going to be in a wheelchair the rest of his life. And he just had this mindset and this approach where he just said, hey, I'm not going to let this hold me back. I'm going to live life to the fullest as much as I possibly can. And he wanted to share that message with people. So, but anyway, they had this video that talks about kind of what happened and had, pictures of the accident and different things like that, a really, really tragic story, difficult story. But again, the message they wanted to convey and they wanted their products to convey was, why not live life to the full? Especially if you're not in that kind of a situation, like why are you kind of holding yourself back and not chasing your dreams and not going after things? And so again, why not live life to the full? And so, but yeah, that was what I would describe as their brand DNA. We like to call it, and we like to really get into what is your brand's DNA? What is that emotional messaging? What is that story we can tell that's going to resonate with people? So we built an ad strategy around that. So not just, hey, here's a hat. Do you want to buy it? Hey, do you like how this looks? Do you want to buy it? But let's bake this story into it, where now they're making a decision based on, kind of this emotional experience that they're having. And so we were able to scale their sales, let's see, 25,000 a month to 90,000 a month within the first 90 days. And then kind of we're able to just kind of keep going from there. And the biggest challenge they had was keeping up with inventory. So as you can imagine, kind of when you scale that fast, you've got to stay on top of inventory, you've got to manage cash flow, all that kind of stuff. But anyway, just was an example where they had kind of plateaued and kind of were hitting a certain ceiling. But once we were able to inject more of their brand DNA into their ads, we were able to do more emotional storytelling. That's when kind of results took off for them. So yeah, those are just a couple examples of, creative strategy, emotions, brand DNA, like, doing all of that work up front, kind of unlock a lot of growth for brands if they haven't done that, if the, kind of marketing team hasn't done that type of work yet.
Yeah, I think honing in on who you are as a brand becomes paramount. And especially those e-commerce brands that want to be able to scale on other marketplaces. Amazon's a massive channel. And frankly speaking, if you're spending on Meta and you're not on Amazon, you are losing at a minimum 33% of your sales. Like they're just going to your competitors on Amazon. But you need to ask yourself like, hey, but my prices are too high compared to what I see on Amazon. And that's fine. You can still have a premium price product on Amazon. But do you know what the difference is? It all comes down to the brand. And brand is nothing more than like the trust that you have built with a consumer over time. And that's what I think the advantage is for all e-commerce brands. There is an onslaught of overseas knockoffs coming into our country every day. And on Amazon, it's extremely rampant. The overseas competitors target the best-selling products. They then spin it up to make it cheaper, all of the above, because they only know how to play the price game. And what happens is they're not about building a brand. They're just about like, hey, can I just make a sale today? And so the best e-commerce brands are all about not just making a front-end acquisition. It's all about building your brand, and it's the experience that you create. And it's those experiences across multiple transactions that develop that trust to where somebody is going to say, I'm willing to pay double the product or double the price for this product because I know that it's either been safety tested or there's no, cancer causing chemicals in here. I know that, the brand actually stands behind this. Whereas I have no idea what I'm getting from this overseas seller. And that I think is the distinguishing factor between the brands that I see dominate Amazon and then be able to dominate omni-channel presence and eventually be able to move into retail. Like that's what the 9-figure brands are doing, is they're focused on that brand story and who they are. Would you agree with that, Joe?
I would. Yeah, I would completely agree. And yeah, I think it's important, especially if you're going to be on Amazon. But yeah, we see the same thing where people run Meta ads and you're just measuring results on Meta, but Amazon consistently goes up as your Meta ad spend goes up. So I think it's important to be on there, like you mentioned. And a lot of people have a love-hate with Amazon, and there's things they love and there's a lot of things that they hate. But kind of doing both is important, and you'll see a lift on both sides by running Meta ads, and it's important to be aware of that. From a buying perspective, a sales perspective, fear and anxiety is a big part of that. So anytime you can kind of take fear and anxiety away, or kind of leverage it, is really important. So the example I made me think of was when you're talking, something like Yeti. I mean, obviously they get brought up a lot, but people pay, twice as much for a Yeti as they do, let's say a Chinese knockoff or whatever that might be. And, on the one hand, some people just want the name. And so they've built up that brand and that brand value and equity and things like that. But the other side of it is, when you're making those types of purchases, or even if it's, cable, an HDMI cable or something like that, there's just that fear and anxiety in the back of your mind where you're like, well, if I buy this knockoff Yeti, maybe the seal's not going to be as good, maybe it's going to crack sooner, whatever it might be. Kind of being able to tell that story, being able to build a brand, and then, kind of having that on Amazon, you're going to have people who are like, hey, I have more trust in this brand than this Chinese knockoff. And so, yeah, it's just a really important part of that process is to, make sure you're building that in as you grow.
Yeah, a big important part of building that brand is understanding the emotional connection that a customer is going to have to your brand and your product. So, Joe, you were talking about that. What are some of the tools and resources that you could give to our listeners to say, hey guys, here's how you actually understand your customer psychographics. Here's what's going on inside their mind. Here's ultimately the transformation that they're looking for, so that you could then spin up all the different ad angles, speaking to the emotional triggers.
Yeah. So yeah, it's a great question. And one of the things that we're doing right now for that, I mean, first of all, it starts with actually talking and listening to your customers. And that's a step that kind of gets overlooked. So even if you're at a trade show and you're talking to people, just the questions they ask, the objections that they raise, or the way you talk about it at a trade show, there's something to learn from there. On the customer service side, the questions that get sent into your customer service team is something you can learn from. But the number one thing we use right now is customer reviews. Could be Amazon reviews, could be your Shopify reviews. But then also we'll go to Reddit and kind of research different products on Reddit. And then one of the things that we are using right now, which probably won't come as a surprise, but we have a process that we use. It's kind of a proven process, and it's a formula we've used with multiple brands where we actually analyze, Reddit posts, Reddit comments, reviews, things like that. And that's where we are able to do what I mentioned, which is the customer sentiment analysis. So what is the emotional experience people are having with this brand? Then we take some time to define it and categorize it and organize it and things like that. And then just kind of go down from there to like I said, we have a process where we We build out ad angles from that analysis. We identify the core messaging pillars. So it starts at a research level where you're actually talking and listening to customers and hearing their real experience. Otherwise, you're left guessing and you're left saying, oh, I think they feel this, and I think they're buying it for that reason. Guessing and checking is really not a very effective marketing strategy. You want to base it on real customer insights. You just keep drilling in from there until eventually you have, your ad angles. Eventually you come up with your copy and your sales pitch and things like that. One other thing I would mention is, and I'm really big on this, basically for a lot of brands, ads should be selling more than brand owners realize. And so when it comes to ads, a lot of people talk about, let's get scroll stopping ads and things like that. And I'm all for stopping the scroll. So let's have a hook on the ad. Let's get their attention in the first 3 seconds. Definitely don't wait longer than that. There's certain things that you need to be doing, but your ads should also be selling. So one thing I like to say about that is whoever's running your ad account, writing your ad copy, writing your ad scripts, all that kind of stuff, they need to know how to sell your product. So you need to know the unique selling points. You need to know what those trigger points are, emotional trigger points are for your customers. And but then you also need to write a script or an ad or design it or whatever that might be in a way that sells the product. And I think that's something that gets overlooked by a lot of people. But that's something that I'm really big on. We're really big on. And essentially when your ad goes out there, and some brands, we're working with the hat brand right now where it's very impulse buy. So it really is, hey, get their attention and get them to buy. And I don't need to tell you, hey, this foam trucker has, this kind of plastic, back, and it's this and it's that. It's like either you want it or you don't. So like, let's focus on grabbing attention. And so actually there's a phrase in advertising where people say the more complicated and the more expensive your product is, the more copy you need for that product. So $25 foam trucker, you don't need a lot of copy. You don't need a lot of selling to kind of, get people where they're ready to buy. But the more expensive something is, the more complicated it is, the more selling you need to do. And I just think that's one step where either a lot of marketing teams or a lot of brand owners, they kind of miss that step and they don't realize every ad they show could be a salesman out there in the marketplace selling for them. So anyway, that's another thing that I like to think about and make sure that we're able to deliver for customers.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Joe, I'm curious, as you have an agency, how much are you guys utilizing AI? And I'm curious, are you utilizing AI? If so, which LLMs are you using that you're finding best results for doing the customer sentiment analysis, or even for the copywriting and scripting of ads? I know that that's almost like a role that's almost going extinct because you no longer need the junior copywriter. You just need the creative strategist that can architect the right offer and know the right selling points and then give it to AI to actually create the copy. How are you using it in your own agency?
Yeah, great question. So first of all, using it as much as possible, leveraging it as much as we can, and all in on AI and ready to get the most out of it we possibly can. But yeah, using it in a lot of different ways. So, even for the analysis, kind of the process that we talked about. So we have, a documented process we go through to do all of that. We'll even use it for things like video script writing, but making sure that we have that front end research, that front end information that we're giving it. And then we found that, kind of our ad video scripts and things like that, when we follow that process, they've got the information that you need for your ad to do a lot of heavy lifting based on the experience we've seen. We've spent millions of dollars on ads. I've spent millions of dollars on ads. I've run thousands of A/B tests. So there's a lot of things that I've learned over that time period. And as smart as AI is, actual intelligence is still, I would say, a key component of the process. But to me, it's a tool that we can use based on our experience and based on what we know in order to create ad copy or ad scripts or whatever that might be. But then we can kind of look it over and finalize it and make sure that, hey, first of all, this is built on a process we know that works. And then we can kind of, double check it and fine tune it and make sure it doesn't sound like it's, kind of ultimately run by a computer or, done by a computer. But yeah, so fully leveraging it, currently using ChatGPT, but I'm actually ready to kind of fully geek out on all of this. And I'm in the process of switching over to kind of having a dedicated computer for it and using basically Claude to kind of start running some of these things. And so, yeah, anyway, right now it's kind of more of we use it as we go. We build projects. We have one of the things that actually works very well in our process is each step of the process, saving kind of a document of that process and then using that as, part of the prompting later on or whatever. And so then again, it has that brand DNA as part of the research process. It has the customer insights as part of the research process. So I would say that's really important is making sure that you have kind of documents and you're able to use those each time you use AI to help with something. But yeah, so currently ChatGPT, kind of have documents and then upload those and build the foundation first. And then once we have that foundation built, then we use it And I guess the last thing I would say is, and I'm curious to know where it goes. And, I don't know what's going to happen. And, some people think it's going to, take everybody's jobs, whatever it might be. But right now I'm viewing it more as, hey, if you brought a plumber into your house and new technology was available, you'd want him using that latest technology to, drill the hole faster, line your pipe better, whatever it might be. And you're not going to be like, man, why are you using that latest technology? Like, why aren't you using that 1980s stuff? But that same technology wouldn't do any good in my hands. So if I was trying to use that technology, I couldn't do anything with it. So it's great technology. It's helpful for a plumber. But to me, at least as of now, you still want to have that tool in the hands of a skilled operator who, knows how to leverage the tool, but not over rely on it and not, again, make it where it seems like everything's written by a computer. And so, yeah, it's interesting to know. I'm interested to know where it heads, but that's kind of my view on it right now. I'm curious to know what are your thoughts on all that?
Yeah, I mean, same thing. We're definitely heavily investing in AI, but AI only sits upon like the good information that you're providing it. We had a fantastic conversation in our last episode with being able to pull in all of your data. It all sits behind like what's your data warehousing strategy and what is your LLM sitting on top of. And so it needs all of your Amazon reviews. It needs all of your Amazon conversion rates. It needs your Shopify conversion rates, your click-through rates. Because if you're just uploading generic reports, what ends up happening is like, it doesn't actually understand certain columns, but it's going to confidently give you an answer and not tell you that it doesn't understand things. And so
Right.
I think that with AI, as it evolves, the first foundation is, are you feeding it the true right data? And is it just like kind of taking the hodgepodge of everything it knows in the world, a lot of Reddit posts, and then just making assumptions on who you are as a brand? So that's kind of our go-to for our brand right now. Joe, as we wrap things up, I love to leave the audience with 3 actionable takeaways from our episode. Here are the 3 actionable takeaways that I noted. You let me know if we're missing something. So number 1, for Shopify, if you want to be scaling your store and you want to go from 6 to 8 figures or even further, one of the first things you have to do is actually identify the strategy you're going to follow. And it goes to a basic principle of, are you looking for high growth at all costs, which might mean even lower profit margins? Or I've often heard of many sellers that will run a deficit, maybe run at a small loss on Shopify, but then they capture all of the profit on Amazon, which then boosts all of their Amazon rankings, and that whole flywheel on Amazon keeps turning. So like the secret is their Shopify front end isn't converting profitably, but what it's doing is it makes their bigger pie, the bigger pie over on Amazon is where all of the profit is gathered and obtained. Or are you going to be focused on, hey, front end, profitable acquisition from day one, we're going to slowly scale. And so again, I think this strategy makes a massive difference. And so you can't do both of those strategies at once. You've got to choose which one you're going to ride and die by, and then know your numbers. So that's item number 1. Action item number 2, you touched on this, but in your ad creative and even as a brand, you need a hill to die on, which means you need to plant your flag in the ground of what you stand for. And it needs to be maybe somewhat controversial, right? You maybe could be the kids clothing company that only uses organic fibers, right? And you believe, let's call it bamboo is of the devil, and you're going to plant your flag in the ground, and that's what you're on, right? And so you only use organic certified cotton that comes from this part of the world. And that's the hill you want to die on. That's what you need to be preaching to your customers, and make sure that that resonates with them emotionally as well. But if you can't create a polarizing hill to die on, your ad creative is going to flounder, because you're basically trying to preach to everybody, but effectively what you're doing is preaching to nobody at the same time. And action item number 3, building a true brand. So don't just see this as one-time transactions. If you actually want to build a meaningful e-commerce business, it's all about the retention marketing. It's all about their first experience, then their second experience, and then their third experience. And that's where you're able to command that premium price in the market. That's why Apple is who Apple is. They've created a whole ecosystem of products that, like, if you leave the iPhone, it also is going to disrupt how you work probably on your laptop. And it's going to disrupt how you utilize a watch. They've got you so embedded to the way that their products work cohesively together. So think through that as a brand owner. How am I creating an experience across multiple products that ultimately builds trust with the customer that they'll come back to me? So Joe, those are the 3 action items that I noted. Anything else that you feel like I missed here?
I mean, those are super solid. So yeah, those are great. I think the one thing I would add is just kind of throw another vote towards making your strategic creative decisions based on real customer insights and research. And I just feel like it takes work and it takes time. And so I've seen a lot of people who kind of just skip over that, especially marketing agencies, and they kind of just want to go straight to designing and creating ads. And so anyway, building a foundation for your creative strategy that is based on real customer insights is, I guess, the fourth thing I would add there. But other than that, those were all great takeaway points.
Awesome. Love it. Let's move into our final questions here. Joe, what is the number one book that you have read that's been the most influential for you, and why?
Yeah. So I mean, I like reading books. There's a lot of books that I've read that I've gotten a lot out of, but I would say I'm actually going to go to this book. It's called Why We Buy by a guy named Paco Underhill. And it's an old school marketing book, even pre-digital marketing book. And it's one of the first books that I read. So I mean, I read it probably 15 or 20 years ago. And yeah, I'm going to go back to that one as being the most influential because, just short version, the book, or Paco Underhill, what he does is he sets up time-lapse cameras and he studies basically consumer behavior based on the time-lapse cameras. And then he makes decisions, or he kind of comes up with theories for retailers and things like that based on what they identify. But anyway, there's a lot of really interesting theories that come from it that I think are fascinating and are really things that you wouldn't have thought of if you hadn't watched the video. So I don't know, that was very influential for me, foundational for me, insightful for me, just to say, hey, when it comes to marketing, don't base your decisions and your copy and all that kind of stuff based on your gut. You actually need to be doing customer research. So I'm going to go with Why We Buy by Paco Underhill.
Love it. Great recommendation. Question number 2, what's your favorite AI tool that you've been using and how have you been using it?
Yeah, so ChatGPT is a go-to right now. So primarily kind of leaning on that. Meta has AI built into their ad platform, but it's still it's not worth using yet. So yeah, so just using that for all the stuff that we talked about. So doing the foundational work, analyzing, reviews so that we don't have to, instead of, reading 500 reviews, you can analyze all of those in one batch, that sort of stuff. And then, like I said, kind of using that as a starting point to start developing, ad angles for brands, ad copy for brands, writing scripts for brands. But yeah, starting with kind of the research side and yeah, just leveraging it as a tool that helps you to process more information than we could process otherwise. And then, kind of benefiting from that information. And yeah, so it's been super helpful.
Great. Final question. Who is somebody that you admire or respect the most in the e-commerce space that other people should be following and why?
Yeah, I'm gonna throw a shout out to a couple people that aren't you're kind of you're the ones that get thrown out a lot. Taylor Holiday, everybody talks about him, and there's some people like that. So I'm gonna go with Sarah Levinger. She is in Denver, and I don't know if you've heard of her before, but she's on Twitter. I like to follow her on Twitter, and what I like about her is she has a unique approach to marketing. And she talks about some of the stuff on the emotional side and sentiment analysis and stuff like that. But anyway, one of the main things that I like is I feel like a lot of other people, they talk about the same things over and over again, but she talks about some stuff that's, kind of really foundational and insightful. So I think she brings a unique perspective that has helped me a lot. And so I'm going to give a shout out for Sarah Levinger. And then also one more is this guy, Chris Hall. And he used to work at Conversion Engine, and now he's running a D2C podcast. He goes by Ecomm Cowboy on Twitter. And so, yeah, anyway, I would just say both of those two are kind of two follows that I think are under the radar, but both worth following.
Awesome recommendations. Love to hear new people to follow. So, Joe, this has been a fantastic podcast. If people want to learn more about you and follow you, where could they do so? Yeah, so I would say either LinkedIn or Twitter are both great places to follow. So, yeah, kind of find me on one of those two. And I can't remember if I'm on there as Joe or Joseph Putnam, but yeah, look me up on LinkedIn or look me up on Twitter, and I'd love to connect with people there. Awesome.
And also, last one is conversionengine.com. So if they want to learn more about what we do and how we help brands, they can also go to conversionengine.com.
Fantastic. Well, Joe, thanks again for your time on the podcast today.
For sure. Great to be here. I enjoyed it.
Thank you for listening. Visit ecommbreakthrough.com for more information. If you've enjoyed today's episode, the best way you can show your appreciation is by clicking the subscribe button and quickly leaving a review. See you again next time.